You are listening to The Real Men Feel Show with your hosts Andy Grant and Appio Hunter. Real Men Feel encourages men to allow and express all of their emotions. Despite what you may have been taught, all emotions do serve you. Real Men Feel is committed to engaging in discussions that most men aren't having, but you don't need to be a man to join us. The Real Men Feel Show is produced live each Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern for your growth and enjoyment. Listen to us on podcast platforms including iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. You can also watch the show on YouTube by visiting realmenfeel.org/YouTube. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or subscribe on iTunes by visiting realmenfeel.org/iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter at realmenfeelorg and on Facebook, facebook.com/realmenfeelshow. All links mentioned in each episode are in the show notes found on the blog at realmenfeel.org. Show your support for Real Men Feel by shopping at realmenfeel.org/swag, by visiting digitaltipjar.com/realmenfeel, or even text us a tip. You can show some love for Real Men Feel by texting Real Men Feel, that's all one word, to 504-226-5306. You'll receive a link back to complete your tip and choose the amount. This is a weekly program, and your reviews, comments, feedback, and participation are welcome during the live show and anytime in our Facebook group, on Twitter, or at realmenfeel.org. Now, let's dive into this week's show. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Real Men Feel. This is your host, Andy Grant. And so far, our guest tonight has yet to show up, but hey, that doesn't have to stop the show, right? Was it
right?
The show must
Absolutely.
go on.
The show must go on.
Or that's a Hollywood saying. That's not a circus saying, is it?
I think it's been attributed to P.T. Barnum.
It is? Okay.
I think, yeah.
All right.
I'm pretty sure. Well, we'll just go there, and if we need to be corrected, I'm sure somebody will.
Yeah, if someone from P.T. Barnum's family wants to come on the show and scold us, we're welcome. So, as always, with me is Appio Hunter.
Greetings.
And, tonight's show still is about the spiritual path versus the religious path, or spirituality versus religion overall, and what's the difference? And is there a difference? And this started because our planned guest wrote an article on the Good Men Project, and he mentioned some Pew research that I had seen as well, and that the number of Americans that call themselves religious has been going down, while the number that say they're spiritual has been going up.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, in the minds of most people, there is a difference. So what's your first take? What's the difference for you? How would you define each?
Whoa, good question. I personally do say that there is a difference between being spiritual and being religious. For me, religion is the institution which provides, I guess you could say, structure and also ceremony and a sense of community, all of those things, which oftentimes, can be very hierarchical. And so to me, that would be, religion. But also coupled in with religion would be some of the less savory aspects of how people associate with religion, which is the dogma, the judgment, oftentimes the doom and gloom pronouncements and so forth. And whereas I tend to look at, so for me, religion is multi-tiered, if you will. There is the sense of community. There is the sense of ritual. But there's also the us versus them type of a mentality, the focus on dogma and sin and everything else. Whereas spirituality, quite literally, this is how I define it, spirituality is one's personal relationship with the divine, however you choose to define the divine. Cool. And that's the way I look at it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to me, dogma is always one that showed up for me when we're talking about religion and rules and more structure, and that organized religion kind of tells you how to practice religion,
Yep.
while spirituality I find is much more based on personal experience.
Yeah,
Right. So your
absolutely.
personal experience, relationship to a higher purpose, a higher energy, source, God, the universe,
Yeah.
um, or even I remember talking to someone in AA, which talks about having a higher power, and said, you
Mhm.
know, you don't believe in anything, just like give up to the doorknob. Like I can't control my drinking, I give up to the doorknob to help guide me to do something better. Right. So
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, whatever you feel is like the higher power, great. Mhm.
so why do you think more people are identifying as spiritual as opposed to religion?
I think what's happening is that a lot of people are rejecting this idea of the us versus them. The telling you have to practice in this particular way, and you have to behave in this particular way, and you have to check off all of these things on this list in order to be quote unquote saved, or whatever. People are rejecting that in favor of a less strict, less judgmental, more comprehensive, more loving, more inclusive uh, form of worship. And and I agree that, yeah, there's the criticism that you sometimes hear from those that are on the, again, this thing about labels that I really kind of get hung up on sometimes. But when people are labeled like the religious right or whatever, I don't like to use that label, but for purposes of the conversation, let's go ahead and just use it. People who are assigned that particular category, or who may even self-identify as being part of the religious right, their criticism of mainstream media being very focused on all the negative aspects of their practices and so forth, and just the vitriol that you hear. Granted, I think that there is a little too much focus on that. And while that vitriol does exist, um, I think that there's a lot of sensationalizing that goes on, because you have to get ratings, and in order to get ratings, you need to create shock, and what's more shocking than somebody who's standing in front of a gay nightclub and shouting that somebody's going to be going to hell and all of that. But my experience with the people who identify, as being part of the religious right, is generally not like that. Yes, they have very, very strongly held beliefs, but are still very decent human beings for the most part.
Hmm. Yeah, like everything has a spectrum of people and such, but like I find that someone can be an orthodox version of their religion, and it doesn't um, have them attacking other groups, or this is the one way and I'm going to make you convince you.
Hmm.
Whereas sometimes the right or ultra conservatives of any religion are more about attacking a group that doesn't believe the same thing, or
Yeah.
really almost trying with force to convert or um,
Hmm.
take you over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah. Exactly.
spirituality is much more fluid, and again, you can decide,
Yeah.
yeah, the doorknob is my God, or God is
Hmm.
my God, or define what God is, and make your own rituals, make your own.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite quotes, I can't think of who said this either, but if the only prayer you say is thank you, that's enough.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think Lori added something to the conversation just now in the chat, which I completely agree with, which is it's the hypocritical behaviors that are turning people off
Yeah.
to the dogma of religion. Which, yeah, I would completely agree. And that's again another unfortunate thing where oftentimes, you almost feel there's almost like a sense of glee sometimes when you hear about people. It's like, oh, this person who's been a big champion of religious freedom laws, etc., who was caught with a gay prostitute. And that there's all, I mean, you almost sense that sense of glee when you hear that type of reporting. And then of course everybody just piles onto the hypocrisy
Yeah.
bandwagon.
And that's almost like that's the lightest hypocrisy. That's the kind that you can laugh at, but it's the
Right, yeah.
like I especially see it in politics where people describe themselves as a Christian and a follower of Jesus Christ, but
Hmm.
none of their policies or actions are. Uh, Jesus Christ was very spiritual, right? He was very fluid and open. Not he wasn't strict dogma, but the notion of Christianity, again, at least in our culture, seems to get narrower and narrower.
Yeah, it does. And you know, American Christianity definitely seems to be much more dogmatic, if you will. And that, again, that's just how it's portrayed. And that's how it comes across in a lot of different circles. I don't know if that's necessarily how it really is, because I've come across the people who absolutely fit every single nasty description that you see in the news, and I have met some people who are very, very devoutly evangelical, and yet the most wonderful, open, caring, kind people that I have met, you know. So yeah, they run the full spectrum. It's I think when one's private behaviors don't line up with their public persona.
Yeah, right. That's the ultimate hypocrisy that really damages society and the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to point out that it isn't just Christianity that has this issue. I mean, virtually every single religion out there. Obviously, our experience has been with the Western religions, particularly Christianity and the offshoots of that. However, you know, Islam has that same challenge where the vast majority of people, if you talk to most Muslims, the vast majority of them completely disagree with not only how Islam is being portrayed in the West, but more so with how many of the Islamists are, you know, spewing all this stuff about, you know, jihad and so forth, and how it's being misinterpreted. You know, I've had the great fortune of speaking to a lot of students. My mom, for the past 6-7 years, well, it's been much longer than that, but she's been hosting students from all over the world. But for the past 6 or 7 years now, every single one of the students that she's been hosting as a part of a homestay program for a local language school have all been from Saudi Arabia. So I've had the great pleasure of getting to know the students from there, and all of them, every single one, they continue to be, you know, shocked and dismayed at the things that, you know, groups like ISIS and before them Al Qaeda would be saying, and it's like, no, they're perverting our faith, they're perverting our religion.
Right. Yeah, and any any movement can be radicalized, and again, it just becomes that narrowing structure of, as Lori's saying it, you know, a fanatic that just
Mm-hmm.
again, it's self-imposed narrowing limitations that
Exactly.
that I think cut you off from spiritual experiences.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The moment that, and here's how I look at it. When you take a beautiful idea, a beautiful philosophy, whether it's encapsulated in a religion or not, and you start to narrow it down to your own personal definitions, and then say that all of you must behave the way that I think you should all behave, and I'm doing it because I think this is what, you know, what God is telling me. That's when it starts to become a problem.
Yeah, yeah. And Lori's pointing out that the same thing can happen in spirituality, and that's true. Someone can be
Mm-hmm.
so hooked on their new agey way, or you're meditating wrong, it's going to be this way, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
there can be people that get as strict and rule following in their sense of spirituality as well.
Right? Yeah, this idea that you have to be positive all the time, you know, the new age bullshit that
Right.
we had Sean on a little while ago talking about
I
that.
think it was over a year ago,
It
actually. But
was.
yeah. So that's something to point out too. So religion or spirituality, there can be bullshit and lies and misinterpretation and just all the human things in both
Absolutely.
aspects
It
too.
inevitably becomes a very, very human thing. And I think where you see a lot of the disconnect between spirituality and religion is, again, it boils down to, is the people who are truly spiritual, and they can be both religious and spiritual at the same time, because I know several people who are very religious and at the same time deeply spiritual, because their personal lives line up with their public expressions of faith.
Right. Yeah. Some people might identify as religious because they go to church every Sunday, but
Mhm.
that's all they do. They
Yeah,
just follow some of the dogma and then pay no attention. But
right. Yeah,
let's I'd like to shift into kind of our experiences.
sure. Yeah.
So growing up, my parents were not religious at all. Was not raised with any organized religion. I lived in a Catholic neighborhood, and I really thought everything was Catholic. I thought that was the main religion in America. I had one Jewish friend, but I just thought that meant he was from a different nationality. I thought like being Jewish, being Canadian, like same, just different place. I had no idea that it was a religion and people like would be mad and pick on him for having a different religion. Um, and I thought that for a long time. I was like, it was
Right.
like high school that I realized, oh, there's other religions. Wow, But so, what was your experience growing up?
My experience is very, very similar. Growing up in Utah, here the predominant faith is Mormonism, and it was the same thing for me. And I don't know what your experience is like there in Massachusetts growing up, but for me, at least here in Utah, religion still is very much a topic of discussion, even now. And it just because being Mormon isn't just having a set of beliefs, and it is a way of life. It is very much a way of life, and your entire life centers around all the activities that go on within the church. I mean, every day of the week there's something that's going on. Typically, not Mondays, because Mondays are what are known as family home evening, and you reserve that time to spend with your family, but it's still a church promoted, church sanctioned, church thing that goes on. And then every other night of the week there's activities for like youth groups in like the large mega churches and so forth. You have all kinds of things that are going on every single day of the week. There's some type of activity, even if it's a sporting activity. It's all centered around the church. Again, it's just the culture here is all about that sense of community, that sense of belonging to this larger organization. And so why wouldn't you associate with everybody? My own exposure to people of other faiths, I was a little fortunate because as I was growing up, I also would go down to Brazil. So I was much more aware of it. But every time I'd come back home to Utah, it was like just everything was LDS. Everybody was Mormon. Everybody would go to the local ward on Sunday, and so yeah, it was when I met my first non-Mormon friend. And the terminology that's used here is non-Mormon. You have the Mormons and the non-Mormons. It was that religious discussion came up, and then it became a non-issue. For me, it was just like, well, fine, you're my friend. I don't care. And I was fortunate enough that my mom was also the same way. Both of my parents were like, we don't care what religion you are. So I had that attitude in my household. So it was a little easier. But I remember sometimes people calling me out. I was like, why are you friends with him? He's not Mormon. I'm like, yeah, so. So that was my experience.
That's funny. Yeah. And so when I was growing up, I had challenges, problems with depression, suicidal thoughts, and at some point I thought, oh, maybe religion is wrong, because I remember reading Karl Marx, and religion is the opiate of the masses, and I was very anti-religion, thinking I was above it, but I also thought that life sucked and there was nothing, and I just wanted to die, and that was the end. So as I realized I had more experiences, that there was more, and we're not just this collection of chemicals and flesh running around. That opened me up more, but I also like, well, maybe I'd be happier if I had some of this opiate of the masses. Maybe I should go to, but so I would go to church with friends. In elementary school, all my friends, like after school, went to catechism classes, and I was like, I want to go. What is this? And I couldn't. And but the church had video games and TVs. It seemed like community, and I was an only child, just living with my mom. I'm like, so I longed for that aspect of something. So that was interesting to recognize. But so as I grew up and I studied religion, I took a class on Islam. I took a class on world religions, just a part of my own seeking. And in my 30s, I moved to where I am in Littleton, and there's the Universalist Unitarian Church down the street from me, and people rave about it. So I go there, and I talk to them, and say, like, I'm battling depression still, and I, tell me, what's your dogma? Tell me how to live. Like, oh, we don't do that. I'm like, what? Like, I'm finally ready to come to organized religion, and you don't have any rules for me to follow? He's like, no, we don't. I'm like, I was so pissed and disappointed. I was like, again, I'm finally ready to give myself over to something, and no, we don't do that.
It's like, man, you picked the wrong folks to talk to.
And then I continued to take the wrong folks to talk to, because then I got involved in Scientology, who very much are good at telling you what to do, and each thing they tell you to do costs a lot of money too.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So, but that the best thing, I got benefits out of Scientology, and that was the first place I truly accepted and believed and had experiences that I was a spiritual being. And I got that, and that's all I got, and that was a great thing to get.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. In fact, I remember you and I talking about your experience about a couple of years ago, and I was really struck by the experience that you actually had, and it reminded me of when I used to live in Tampa, just on the other side of the bay in Clearwater. That's the Church of Scientology's headquarters, and I just remember. People would oftentimes poke fun at the Mormon missionaries, wearing their suits and their name tags and the white shirts and everything else. And, the folks who were the employees of the Church of Scientology were all walking around wearing the same, pretty much the same uniforms, if you will. That I just call them uniforms. And I remember sometimes some of my friends like pointing it out and saying, "Oh, that's so weird," and stuff. And for me, it wasn't weird at all because, of course, in living in Salt Lake City and being right by the headquarters of the LDS Church, same thing. Everybody's going to work. Everybody who worked for the church would always go in their suits. It looks like they were basically going to church, which in a way they were. They're just going to work at church.
Yeah, so Scientology is like everything around it, like how you dress and act. It's all tied to the early '50s when L. Ron Hubbard was writing it all. Yep. So they have not like grown. Like everything's still on paper, and I kept getting in trouble and sent to the ethics office because I used the internet. And I would come in like, "Hey, I read this about." "Oh, you what? You read it on?" "Oh no, off you go!" And we just had to write things out that I was. It might be being Bart Simpson writing on the board. "I will not use the internet again," and like. Kidding me? But then they'd have some classes that were like beneficial. So I was going in and taking classes all the time. And Lori, my wife, joined me. I think she joined just to make sure, what are you doing? So she could do some things with me just to keep an eye on me. But
you, Lori.
Yeah. But eventually I got kicked out for good and was declared a
persona non grata, basically.
Yeah, they call it a PC, a pre-clear, and I could keep paying for classes, but I wasn't allowed to be audited or get their real helpful practices.
Right.
Yeah, it all came to head. I remember I finally committed to spending thousands of dollars and going to do this thing they call the purification rundown, which is like 8 to 10 hours a day in a sauna and just drinking a special substance that they give you just to flush everything out of you and clear yourself. And I'm going to do this. At the last minute, they decided I had too much experience with psychiatry, so we can't help you. Like they're so anti-psychiatry. If you've had much in your background, they don't want to touch you. They do.
Right.
Really weird, but
well, it's interesting because my own when you bring up the psychiatry thing, it brings up my own experiences with LDS Social Services, which is like one of the more, I would say, positive aspects of what the LDS Church does is that it is very service-oriented religion. And even though I'm no longer, part of the church or whatever, I should say practicing, I no longer really identify as Mormon. I nevertheless, see a lot of the positive things which they can do in the community, and they're really, really, really big in helping like local homeless shelters. They interact with many of the other faiths. I mean, they're a huge donor to St. Vincent de Paul Homeless Shelter, which is Catholic-run charity, but the LDS Church nevertheless provides a lot of support to them and so forth. But all of that is done through LDS Social Services. Well, one of the things that LDS Social Services also provides is counseling, and most of the people who work for LDS Social Services providing counseling are, psychologists. They've actually studied psychology. They're familiar with all the things and so forth. But back in the 1980s and 1990s, one of the services that they offered, and it was church sanctioned, it's not anymore, but was conversion therapy. And, we've talked a little bit about my own experiences with conversion therapy. Back then it was called reparative therapy. And I honestly don't know why they changed the terminology. I think it's because it's like less insidious. I don't know, but the whole idea behind it at the time was, the reparative. We are helping you to repair your identity and your sexual identity and so forth, so that you can have healthier relationships with men. And I know some wonderful people who, had very good experiences with it, and who are living the same life, have been able to, find a path that worked for them, which I celebrate with them, however, I found that for me, it did more damage than good. I was on the verge of committing suicide most of the time as well. What kept me alive was my fear of fear of going to hell, and although in LDS theology there is no hell, but B, really, I don't want that to put that burden on my family of my death. So fear kept me alive. Fear of many, 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 many things. And I'm grateful. But some of the positive things that came out of my own experience with church sanctioned psychology was learning how to build healthy relationships with people in general. So it helped. It did help.
So was that experience with the conversion therapy, is that what had you leave the organized religion of Mormonism and go more spirituality, or
sort of. It did get me on that path, but ultimately what got me on the path of just moving entirely towards spirituality and just not wanting to have anything to do with organized religion in general was the fact that just the simple questions which I always had, which is, why is it every single organized religion, especially it's a very hierarchical one, claims to have pretty much a monopoly on the truth? And it's like, our way is the only way, and you have to go our way. And yet it's like everybody had the same, monopoly, and there were like thousands of monopolies out there. And it seems like every single person seemed to have, be happy following whatever it was that they were following. Ultimately, for me, it's just like, what? It is a personal thing. It ultimately is a personal thing. And whatever path is the path that brings you the greatest joy, fantastic. Knock yourself out. Have fun. Enjoy it.
Were you ever practicing Mormon?
Yeah. Oh, very much so.
Okay.
In fact, I was during the times I was going through conversion therapy, I was looking for reasons to stay in the church, and I kept on finding all kinds of reasons to leave instead. I was desperate to stay in. Ultimately, it came to the point where I realized that I was persona non grata, especially when a couple of years ago the church declared that somebody like me who is married to in the same gender relationship, I am officially an apostate now. So I am officially not welcome in the church. As long as I divorce my husband, decide to go back to being extremely miserable and wanting to commit suicide, of course, then I'm welcome back. But why would I want to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's Scientology, very much the same way. Really, the term that I was declared illegal. So I'm an illegal PC, an illegal pre-clear.
Right.
So, all right. So we've both been banished by.
Exactly. and I have to say, if any of my extended family is listening right now, understand this is just me speaking strictly for me. I still have great love for the people, and even have great admiration and respect for the institution, simply because the institution still does a lot of good in the community. It is simply the dogma where I draw the line.
So does anything stand out top of mind for your most awakening spiritual experience, that something that really made you realize that you were connected to something else, be it in your time with Mormonism or since?
Sure, yeah. Well, I've always known that I had much greater connection than I was being told. And I lived with being afraid of it, of that particular connection, because in most Christian faiths, regardless of whether it's Mormonism or any other faith, if it's not coming from, if it's not something that's sanctioned by the church, if you will, if an experience is not a church sanctioned experience, it's coming from the devil. So as long as it's coming from the devil, it's something to be feared and so forth. So my ability to just sense what people were feeling, to even kind of just, I never really fully focused on it until later. But just my ability to just know so many different things and to sense certain things and be aware of so many different things. Some of it absolutely lined up with doctrine and what I was being told and the dogma, but a lot of it didn't. And it was like, oh, that needs to be feared. That's the devil speaking to you, the devil trying to deceive you, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually I realized, no, I woke up on my own. It was a long journey. And I realized that, no, there is, at least my experience has been, there is no judgment in the realms of the divine. There's none whatsoever. That is a purely man-made construct.
And is there one particular moment that you really, I get that? Like you're stating it now, but when did this? Wow, I know this to be true.
I haven't said there was a particular moment. It was really more of a journey and a process and a slow, and a slow realization. And then there was a point in January of 2015. So it's been a little over 3 years now where that journey really accelerated. And, I think I've shared that on the show before. But yeah, it was just through a very dear friend who really started helping me to wake up to the totality of me and lining up with me and my own process of connecting with everything that I'm connecting with. Through hiding, through still having to hide a little bit, and then fully coming out is just, I'm just tapped in, tuned in, turned on a lot of the time, and whenever I need to, I can fully just jump into different realms and different dimensions, if you will, and be there and draw from that if needed.
Do you find that being on the spiritual path, is there a period when you're done, it's complete, it's the finish line of spirituality or anything like that?
No. Just as there's always expansion, there's always growth, especially since in speaking in strictly human terms, this dimension that we live in, this universe that we live in, is also expanding. Our current understanding of the physics of this universe lead us to believe that it may eventually slow down or it may eventually fly apart. It's inconclusive. The information that we have is completely inconclusive. The way I look at it is that we're tied into the universe. We're not separate from the universe, which means that if the universe is constantly expanding, so are we. The journey is never complete. And there's always going to be new things to learn, new information to be had.
I love what you say about expansion, because I do Akashic readings for myself and for clients.
Right.
And a common theme with people, it's your personal expansion that fuels the expansion of the universe.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So it's our personal growth. It's our individual expression of spirituality that feeds spirituality.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. And, people who it's like, no, it's like this book says this and it was written thousands of years ago, even though it's meant for the time that it was written. It says this and this is the end all and be all. And it doesn't matter which book you're referring to, because there are many, many books, in many different faiths and traditions that, people like to stick to that and that's it. We are always going to be expanding no matter what. We're always going to be growing no matter what. this idea that there's something that's fixed and unchangeable is completely contrary to the truth of what actually is happening. And that's one thing I think is interesting about LDS theology, is that LDS theology actually allows for that expansion. If anything, celebrates it and embraces the constant expansion. Of course, within the narrowly defined rules and parameters that you're given, but still, they embrace the idea of constant and eternal expansion and growth.
Could you ever imagine yourself returning to an organized religion, be it Mormonism or something else? No.
Emphatically, no. Yeah, absolutely no. No. It's just. Although I'm not opposed to participating in ceremonies which foster a sense of community and belonging.
Yeah, me and my wife have traveled a lot, been to a lot of different countries and third world countries, and we love to experience rituals and practices and places that welcome you into their religion to have an experience of it, but without falling into it or joining or whatever.
Exactly.
Because that's one. So I even have personal experience with born again Christians, and I was in college. I was a communications major, and I worked at the local public access station. And one night I was left to be alone and set up the studio for the first show of a local pastor. I don't know what to call him. Be a pastor, but they were born again Christian group.
Right.
And he's talking to me. Okay, so he's talking to me after, and just I'm talking, and before I know it, he's got my hand on the Bible and he's doing stuff, and I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Welcome," and hugging me. I'm like, "Oh, great!" Like, what just happened? And they kept calling me, and I'm like, "What? I didn't realize I joined something. I don't know what's happening." I was just, I'm just being polite and nodding and trying to get this conversation to end so I can go home. But they thought I had joined their church, so that was tough to get out of.
It's so funny because I have to share my experience, this particular experience that I had when my stepson decided to, by this particular point I had left the church and so forth, but my stepson had actually decided to join it. And he ended up serving a mission. It's very much part of the LDS culture that every young man at 18 is expected to serve a 2-year mission for the church. And it's not mandatory, but it is expected. And there, especially in Utah, there's a lot of pressure to do that. He served a mission and so forth. And so while he was out on his mission, my husband decided that he wanted to find out a little bit more about the experience. I mean, I told him what it was like, even though I never served one myself. But, I knew from my brother, many of my cousins and so forth who had all gone out, I had a pretty good idea of what, and could explain it to him. But he really wanted to see what it was like. So he invited the missionaries over one time to listen to the discussion so he could have a full-on experience himself see what his son was doing. And so, we came over, and by this particular point, I was able to sit with them as both somebody who was on the inside, but also as an outside observer. Now, I'm a little hesitant to share this experience, and at the same time, I feel it's important for me to do so because and my hesitancy has everything to do with the fact that I still have great reverence and respect for the beliefs of the majority of my family. And so, I want to make it very, very clear. This is just simply what I observed from my point of view, and it's not meant as a criticism or anything like that. But what I observed after having spent years working in real estate sales is I was observing a really, really good Brian Tracy or Tom Hopkins sales job. It was amazing. I mean, I just sat there and just was like, yeah, okay, I see them handling this objection. I see them asking for the sale because they always invite somebody to be baptized. That to me is like, oh, well, they're asking for the sale right there. And then it's like when my when my husband would be like, hey, well, no, I just want to understand what my son is doing and so forth. They would try a different tactic and ask for the sale again, invite them to be baptized again. I just sat there flabbergasted and amazed, and I was like, oh my gosh, no wonder Utah is the center of the network marketing universe. Because if you can sell religion successfully, you can sell anything. And that was strictly me speaking to myself. But it was an amazing experience, and if anything, a very eye-opening experience. And at the same time, I have to express my deep admiration on a couple of points. First of all, these are very young men and women who go out at a very critical time in their lives to do something which is extremely difficult. The level of devotion that they have to doing something like that is absolutely amazing. So props to them. Kudos to them for doing it. Secondly, it can be an incredibly life-changing experience. And I know a lot of people who, after their missions, they came back home and it's like, nope, this isn't for me anymore. They were out there trying to convert people, but at the end of the day, they ended up deciding that this was not for them and found a different path for themselves.
I wonder if there's anything that you do now, or a spiritual experience you've had, or practice that you do that years ago you would have thought, no, that's BS, that's not real, or anything like that.
Yes, actually, I do. I'm still not consistent with it, but I'm becoming much more practiced and much more consistent with it now. And that is, I do sit in the best way for me to describe it. And this is the terminology that I sit in let me use a term that perhaps most of the listeners could relate to a little bit more easily. I sit in divine realms, just to be there, just to get a sense of just who we are, the totality of who we are as humanity. And it's just a beautiful, wonderful experience. It is a form of meditation, if you will. But oftentimes it is, to be there. Funny, because I'm getting a little download right now. It's like, no, it's more like you're just popping your head in periodically. Like, okay, I stand corrected. But what it is my goal really is to be able to sit in there and root myself in the best thing to describe it would be to root myself in the realm of love. And if I can root myself there, I feel like then I'll be in the best position to serve possible.
I really like that phrase, sitting in the realm of love, because when you're first saying a divine realm, or the divine realm, I forget exactly how you're
divine realms, as in plural.
Okay.
Right.
All right, good, because I feel like, well, is God everywhere? Like, is this not a divine realm right here and now? Or so there are hierarchies or layers, but when you just got like kind of this pure love energy, I can really feel like, yeah, that's different than the average here and now of human experience, right?
Exactly, because sometimes I honestly, I really try to find terminology. It depends on really whom I'm talking to. And so if it was just you and me talking privately, I could use terminology that a lot of people would be like, huh? But since obviously, we have a lot of listeners, I'm trying to use terminology that they could potentially, relate to as well. But yeah, at the end of the day, what I'm really aiming for, what I really want to do for myself, is to root myself in the realm of love.
Yeah, and what I've come to see as probably the root cause of trouble and challenge with organized religions is that they may have been founded in love, but over time they've morphed and they're really rooted in fear.
Exactly. They got polluted by fear and wound up getting rooted in fear. Because there was that sense of needing, because somebody came along, appropriated it, and it could be a someone or a bunch of someones who came along, appropriated it, and decided to use it for their own selfish purposes. And then, yeah, it became a bunch of, fear-based stuff.
Yeah, and instead of being about expansion, a lot of organized religion became about control.
Yeah, absolutely. Organized religions are very much about control. And institutions can develop almost like a consciousness of their own. And as with any living creature, its ultimate goal is to survive. So, people who serve those institutions may not even realizing that all they're doing is doing everything they possibly can for it to survive. And those institutions will try anything possible to survive. So yeah, I mean, oftentimes when you see this us versus them mentality and just the constant drumbeat of fear, 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 fear. Let's circle the wagons. Let's batten down. Let's double down on all of the restrictions and everything else. All it is the institution fighting for its life. And when we're able to let go of that, when we're able to step back and just like, what, we don't have to have any fear of anything. And if we can just allow, including the institutions, to just be rather than trying to fight against them, everything ends up evening out and everything balances.
And so there's another really key word. I find like if you feel happy and balanced in your life, practicing an organized religion, like wonderful.
Yes.
But if it doesn't feel that good, then explore something else, perhaps.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Absolutely. I've said it a couple of times tonight, and it really helps to reiterate that. Find the path that brings you joy. It doesn't matter what it is, and at the same time, that path, realize that it is your path. And, when you try, and if you wish to share that path, and if somebody wants to participate in it, fantastic. But to try to force it, to try to say, no, you're wrong and I'm right, and then get caught in the whole, trying to convince somebody else of their wrongness and your rightness, you're going to find that you're not balanced anymore. You're out of alignment.
Cool.
Let it be your thing.
Yeah. So your path could be, in Catholicism, Mormonism. It could be in born-again Christianity. It could be in Jewish. It could be Islam,
or Hinduism, or Taoism, or Buddhism. Yeah, exactly.
And you could jump from each to another in search. So yeah, honor and respect your path, and I invite people to just be willing to explore and learn about other cultures and practices and see what feels best to you.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I have found that the people who, yes, there are many deeply spiritual people who are still highly judgmental. There are very many religious people who are not, and vice versa. The people who are willing to say, this is my path, and you are welcome to explore yours, and we can walk together. Our paths can run parallel to each other. Those are the ones who fight into the greatest joy. Those are the ones who live in the greatest peace. Yeah.
Well, that feels like a nice spot to kind of end this, unless there's something else you wanted to add.
No, that feels like a perfect spot.
Cool. So thanks everyone for listening and tuning in. Thanks, Lori, for joining us here live and sharing some of your comments. And if you like this show, if you like all the shows, there are ways that you can support Real Men Feel to keep our message going out and reaching more people. You can shop for some swag at realmenfeel.org/swag. And you can also visit digitaltipjar.com/realmenfeel. And you can even text us a tip at any time. We just cross your mind. You can just grab your phone.
Yeah.
You can text Real Men Feel to 504-226-5306. So your support via listening, via reviews, via ratings, via monetary support to keep the lights on, keep the Real Men Feel engine going. It's greatly appreciated. And whatever path you're on, we honor you for being on a path.
Yes.
Not just sitting still.
Absolutely, yes.
Cool. So until next week, be good to yourself.
Amen to that.
Thank you for listening to Real Men Feel. Until next week, visit realmenfeel.org or the Real Men Feel Facebook group and share what you thought of this episode. Please give this podcast a review on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you are discovering Real Men Feel. Reach out to us at realmenfeel@gmail.com. Show us some love by visiting realmenfeel.org/swag or digitaltipjar.com/realmenfeel. Learn more about Andy Grant at theandygrant.com and Appio Hunter at appiohunter.com.